Welcome to Banter. This is the channel where we discuss some of my favorite bands and analyze their discographies, so you know where to start. And for this video, we're going to continue covering Opeth. This is part 2 of a 3-part series. In part 1, I covered the 4 90s Opeth records: Orchid, Morning Rise, My Arms Are Hers, and Still Life. This is part 2, so I'm going to cover the 5 albums released in the 2000s. Those are Blackwater Park, Deliverance, Damnation, Ghost Reveries, and Watershed. So if you want to get caught up with the Opeth albums that came out before these ones, go watch part 1 of this series. But without further ado, let's just get into it. As always, I'm going to rank these albums in a tier list as I go, so you can see how I think they stack up to each other. But without further ado, let's get into it with the biggest album of Opeth's career, Blackwater Park. Does 2001 Blackwater Park even need an introduction? I mean, this album is pretty much universally loved in the metal world, and for good reason, because this album absolutely kicks ass from front to back. This was the first Opeth album that was produced by Steven Wilson, and let me tell you, there is a huge difference in the production here than with the first 4 Opeth albums. Some of the production, especially on an album like My Arms Are Hers, was pretty iffy, but here, the music is so much more clear, and it really allows those incredible guitar riffs and those brutal death metal growls to really connect so much harder than they did on the first 4 Opeth albums. Many of these already amazing songs just stand out so much more than they would otherwise. Just like with Still Life, Blackwater Park is another one of my all-time favorite albums. So with this one, I'm just going to cover every single song, go through this album from front to back, because really, with Blackwater Park, there's nothing short of amazing on here. The record opens with the Leper Affinity, and man, what a way to kick this album off. The opening riff is sure to get you headbanging, and those death metal growls really come through hard. The guitar solo here is also one of the best I've ever heard from the band. The Leper Affinity really is a shining star in Opeth's catalog, and there's a reason it remains a live staple to this day. Bleak is the second song on the album, and this is really one of my favorite Opeth songs. The intro is so heavy, and it's got probably my favorite Opeth riff ever. The second half of the song mellows out a lot more, but it feels a lot more emotional than some of the other softer songs that Opeth have done. And despite that first part being so heavy, the song is still full of hooks that just you can't get it out of your head. Blackwater Park was really the first Opeth album that I got into, and my dad and I, we really connect on music. We show each other a lot of new music that we're listening to. So I remember when I'm like, there's this band I'm getting into, Opeth, they're amazing, I'm going to show them to you. So we get in the car to put music on, I turn the radio on, and the song I put on was Bleak. And I remember him tapping along to that opening riff, on the steering wheel, and then the vocals start, and it's the reaction, his exact words were, "Why are demons invading my car?" And that's something, you know, it's an example of how upon first listen, you can hear Opeth and be like, whoa, like, what's going on? But then when you get to the softer side, it can really click for someone who's new to this kind of music. That's why Opeth are such a great transitional band to get someone from maybe, you know, more clean singing stuff into the heavier stuff, because they are that mix. They were certainly the band for me that helped me get there. And Bleak, along with the rest of this album, were songs that really got me into that heavier style of music.
This is the next track on the album, and it really takes things down a notch with a much softer tone. Instead of intense guitar riffs and pounding drum hits with those demonic growls, you get acoustic strumming and fully clean vocals. The song has a really melancholy feel to it, and the lyrics discuss the topic of dealing with death. Some may not like the drastic change in pace, but for me it's one of the highlights of Blackwater Park. Following Harvest, we have track number 4, Drapery Falls. This is an epic 10-minute track that starts off pretty relaxed and calm, but it really picks up in the second half, before getting pretty calm again towards the end. I love the transitions on this thing, and it's a song that does a fantastic job of creating an atmosphere. You really feel immersed in every single note played during the Drapery Falls, and it's a track that demands to be listened to repeatedly. Surge for November follows the same formula as the Drapery Falls. It's soft, then loud, then back to soft at the end. But that's okay, as it's a great song. The beginning and quiet portions really show the layering of guitars that allow Opeth to have a huge sound even when they're playing soft. And that's something that makes Dirge for November just a great song. It's not one of my favorites on this album, but it's not Blackwater Park. It's got stiff competition. Funeral Portrait really kicks things back up to 11 with a kick-ass riff, and it's full of amazing death metal vocals everyone loves Opeth for. After a quick little instrumental with Patterns in the Ivy, we get to my favorite song on the album, the mammoth 12-minute title track. This is the heaviest song Opeth have ever done, and you could fill a list of the best metal riffs of the 21st century with just this song. It's just riff after god-tier riff. Sure, it's a bit repetitive at times, but it's like getting extra ice cream. You just keep wanting it again and again and again. It's got some brief quiet sections, but that's something I love, because what that does is it cools down for a bit, so then when the next just absolute mammoth riff comes in, it hits you that much harder. If this song doesn't make me want to headbang along, you're not a human.
The title track to Blackwater Park is a song I got kind of a funny story about. So, this is back, I was probably 10 years old, and there was this YouTuber I watched, and I mostly watched him for, he was talking about movies that were coming out at the time, and like stuff that was going on YouTube, which I was interested in. Not so much music at that time, but that's something he did talk about was music. And I remember in one of his videos, he mentioned that his favorite song ever was the song Blackwater Park by Opeth. So I'm like, okay, I like this YouTuber, I'll go listen to his favorite song. Now, keep in mind that this was a time where I was pretty much just listening to top 40 stuff, and, like, the heaviest thing I'd ever heard was Numb by Linkin Park. So I go to YouTube, I search Opeth, Blackwater Park, put it on, and I'm really liking this for about the first 2 minutes. And then those vocals come in, and I'm like, no thanks. I was like, whoa, what is this? But it was a, whoa, what is this? Oh my god, turn it off now. So fast forward a few years later, and I'm getting into rock and metal music. And I had, so this stuff I'd heard from Opeth, I just heard a couple songs. I'd heard like Eternal Rains Will Come, Window Pane. So I remember seeing a Loudwire list, and it was like greatest heavy metal songs of the 21st century. And I remember Blackwater Park being number 2. So I'm like, hey, I've liked the Opeth stuff I've heard. I'll go listen to this song. And I had the same reaction of, oh my god, what is happening? But instead of a reaction of, oh my god, what is happening, turn that off, it was, more, give me more, I need more. And I went and I just listened to that whole album front to back. I've been a huge Opeth fan ever since. So, Blackwater Park, the song especially, but the album too, just has so much sentimental value to me. And for that reason, it'll always be one of my all-time favorites. It's an album that allowed me to get into a far heavier style of music than what I was listening to before, and it was the album that introduced me to this band that's been such a huge part of my life since I started listening to them.
Blackwater Park's another album. It's like, is there anywhere you can put it but the highest possible S tier? I mean, seriously, guys, this is a heavy metal classic. If you haven't listened to it yet, change that right now. Go listen to it immediately. It's an album where every song connects, and it's the turning point in Opeth's career, where they went from a not so well-known band, you know, that just kind of had a cult following, to a band that was playing on the world stage. And then, of course, for me, it's the album that really got me into Opeth. It's the album that got me into death metal in general. And it's just an album that's going to have so much sentimental value to me for the rest of my life. It's always going to be one of my favorites. For me, I still prefer Still Life as my favorite Opeth album, but don't let that make Blackwater Park seem like any less. This album isn't just perfect, it's beyond perfect. It's an album you need to listen to immediately.
Opeth would follow up Blackwater Park with a bold project, a double album with one heavy side and one soft side titled Deliverance and Damnation. However, the record label would force the band to release these two albums separately. While they go hand in hand, they're drastically different, so I'm going to cover them differently. The first of the two to be released was Deliverance in 2002. This was originally supposed to be an album with pure death metal growls. However, the end product came out following more or less the standard Opeth formula, but this is still one of the heaviest Opeth albums. This 6-track album features some great songs on it, and it's also much more lyrically dark than many of the other Opeth albums. The album opener, Wreath, launches into its full fury right off the bat and really shows the heavy side of Opeth. This song also really shows the talent of drummer Martin Lopez. Deliverance is, in my opinion, the album where I think Martin Lopez shines the brightest. His drum beats come through the best, and they're really complex and fast on this album, and Wreath really showcases that. Following Wreath, we get the Leviathan 13-minute title track. The title track to Deliverance is really one of the essential Opeth songs. If you see Opeth live, it's pretty much a guarantee that they're going to play this song, and there's a reason for that. Deliverance is actually a song I didn't love too much at first, and it took me a while to really grasp it. But once I fully understood this track, boy, I discovered how much I love it. The song has so many sound shifts, starting off ridiculously heavy, with Martin Lopez pummeling the kick drums, and those two guitars synchronize, and it just gives it this huge sound. Outro for the song, while I admit a bit repetitive, really shows off the ability of the musicians, especially in the rhythm section. Deliverance isn't as melodic as some of the other really great Opeth songs. This one's more technical, and it just shows off how skilled Opeth are as a band. It's really become a banner anthem for them, and it's easy to see why. A Fair Judgment comes after two insanely heavy tracks, and while it is soft, this is probably my favorite song on the album. There's just something so hypnotic about it, those open piano keys and Mikhail's almost whispered vocals. The guitar work here, though, that's easily the highlight. There are several great licks, and that solo around the 6-minute mark is my favorite Opeth guitar solo, and there are a lot to choose from. In fact, if I was to make a list of my top 10 favorite guitar solos ever, I guarantee you this would make that list. It's long, it's epic, and it's full of emotion. Fair Judgment is just an amazing, amazing song. The final track on Deliverance that I'm going to talk about here is Master's Apprentices. This is an incredibly heavy masterpiece of a song. That opening riff just demands you to bang your head at full force, and Lopez is just machine gunning on his drums in the background. When Mikhail comes in, it's just this monstrous presence. If demons were real, I'm sure this is what they sound like. Master's Apprentices is one of the heaviest Opeth songs ever, and a close second to A Fair Judgment for my favorite song on this album. Deliverance is really good. If you notice, I didn't talk about every song on here like I did with My Arms Are Hers, Still Life, and Blackwater Park, and that's just because the other two tracks on this album, For Absent Friends and By the Pain I See in Others, are tracks I honestly don't really go back to that much. Deliverance isn't an album I find myself listening to in full all the time, but the highlights of this album are absolutely phenomenal and some of the best Opeth songs there is, especially Master's Apprentices and A Fair Judgment. Those two songs are like top tier Opeth songs, and the title track to Deliverance 2, that's one you gotta listen to because it's just one of those like essential Opeth songs. They always play it live, and every Opeth fan knows and loves that song. Overall, I'd say Deliverance is a strong A tier. It's by no means my favorite Opeth album, and it's not a front-to-back masterpiece. I definitely listen to albums, you know, like Still Life, Blackwater Park, Damnation. I listen to albums like that more than I listen to this one. However, it's still really good. And the highlights of this album are fantastic. Like the other album I have in A tier right now, Morning Rise, that's an album that not everything on it is phenomenal, but the highlights are insanely good. Some of the best Opeth music ever. And that's pretty much how I feel about Deliverance, you know. So would I get this album and just listen to it from front to back? No. But would I listen to Wreath, Deliverance, A Fair Judgment, and Master's Apprentices? Absolutely. You'll have a great time with those songs. Just, if we're picking Opeth albums to start off with, listen to, you know, your Blackwater Park, Still Life, My Arms Are Hers, Damnation, those albums. The other half in the duo of albums that is Deliverance and Damnation as well, Damnation. This album vastly differs from Deliverance, or any Opeth album released up to this point. No longer the death metal growls, distortion guitars, and double bass. Instead, you get a completely clean album that almost has a jazzy feel to it. The change in pace from the rest of Opeth's catalog leads to this album getting a variety of reactions, with some loving it, some hating it. As far as what I think, I love Damnation to death. I made it pretty clear in talking about the Opeth albums that precede this one that the soft side of Opeth has some of the best stuff they've released. Songs like Face of Melinda, Benighted, Credence, Harvest, To Bid You Farewell, and Fair Judgment. So an entirely clean album isn't something I have an issue with at all. The death metal growls are really only a small part of what makes Opeth so great. Damnation shows that this band has the power to create incredible music completely outside of their traditional format, and it worked out great for them. This is their most streamed album on Spotify, and the band's two most popular songs, Window Pane and In My Time of Need, come off this album. Damnation has a super accessible sound, and it allowed Opeth to reach audiences that they wouldn't have otherwise reached, while retaining the musical quality, and I love that. The album opener is Window Pane. This song takes the simple theme of observing someone through a window and turns it into something beautiful. The song is full of great guitar work, including several great solos. Martin Lopez really does an amazing job behind the kit here with so many good fills and a beat that just perfectly fits the song. and Mikhail's vocals are almost hypnotic. His full vocal range is also really shown off here. Window Pane is the most streamed Opeth song, and I can certainly see why. It's a great song that also manages to be easily accessible to a wide number of people, and I love it.
The voice of the children cry.
Track 2 is In My Time of Need, one of my favorite songs on the album. This track deals with the topic of depression, and how someone can still be so close to someone but feel so lost and so alone. The minor chords and hushed vocals just make this song so beautiful, yet so sad. A captivating listen from start to finish. Death Whispered a Lullaby is another great track. It's really eerie and haunting. The lyrics describe someone on their deathbed, with the Grim Reaper coming to take them away. However, instead of being portrayed as this evil presence, he's portrayed as a necessary force to bring someone to the next chapter in their existence. This is another track where Martin Lopez really shines on the drums. I think Deliverance and Damnation is where he was at peak performance. Death Whispered a Lullaby is another amazing track. Closure is another song that I love before we lead into Hope Leaves. This is probably the softest song Opeth have, as well as the most upbeat on the album musically. Now, lyrically, this is a dark song, much like the rest of Damnation. It's a song about being separated from somebody who you love, and yearning to reach them, but eventually giving up hope that you ever will. Despite its subject matter, it's a song I put on when I just need to relax and unwind. Those beautiful acoustic chords just put me in a trance. My favorite song on Damnation is To Rid the Disease. That awesome riff the song repeats throughout its entire length that, despite being completely clean, still holds up as one of the best Opeth riffs. I just love the way the vocals build this song up to that amazing chorus that is impossible to not sing along with. The bass line in this song is also fantastic, and this is an album full of great bass lines. I would say To Rid the Disease has the best bass line on this album. One of the best Opeth bass lines. Morning Rise has so many too. To Rid the Disease is the perfect representation of the Damnation sound, and in my opinion is one of the best Opeth songs ever. Damnation is the Opeth album that sounds the least like any other Opeth album. It's really unique because it sounds absolutely nothing like their death metal stuff that they had done up to that point and would continue to do for a little bit after Damnation, but it also sounds nothing like the prog rock stuff they did in the 2010s. So ranking Damnation with the other Opeth albums is pretty tough, and you see some really varied reactions. For some people, this is going to be an album that makes it so easy to get into Opeth. These are usually the people who aren't a big fan of the death metal growls, and honestly, if you don't like death metal that much and you're trying to get into Opeth, start with this album. This is by far the best Opeth album that is written completely clean. And some people won't like it as much because they only listen to Opeth because they like the death metal growls. And while I think that is rather close-minded, that is okay too. Me personally, I love Damnation. It's one of my favorite Opeth albums. It's just full of so many great songs. And I think this is one of the Opeth albums that is pretty much mandatory listening if you want to get into the band. It's the best Opeth clean album, and it's just front to back, top tier. This is an unpopular opinion. Now, you'll pretty much know where it goes in the tier list after this. I think this album is equally as good as, if not better than, Blackwater Park. It really just depends on the mood I'm in. Some days I want to listen to Blackwater Park, and some days I want to listen to Damnation. But both albums, for sure, 10 out of 10. I absolutely love it. I'm going to put Damnation in S tier. I know some people might not put it in S tier, but that's where I'd rank it. And I think if you're trying to get into Opeth, this is one of the first albums you should listen to. I would say if you're coming from Opeth and you're not quite into the death metal stuff yet, start here and then go listen to albums like Blackwater Park and Still Life. Damnation is an excellent tool for getting into this band because it's an album that allows people from other genres to get into them, and that's why I think this is their most streamed album. It's fantastic from front to back, and I can pretty much guarantee you'll love it unless you're a death metal purist. 10 years after their debut album, Opeth released Ghost Reveries in 2005 and proved that this band is still a force in the metal world. This would be the last Opeth album to feature Peter Lindgren on guitar and Martin Lopez on drums, and it's safe to say that they went out on a high note. Ghost Reveries is probably the most balanced Opeth record between the soft side and the heavy side, as well as one of the darkest albums they put out. Instead of their traditional standard tuning, this album is in drop D, and it gives it this ominous and dark feel. This is also the album where I feel that Mikhail really perfected his death metal growl. Some of his most brutal and intense screams can be found on Ghost Reveries. When you put on Ghost Reveries, whether you stick your CD in the CD player, you put your record on, or you just listen to it on Spotify, this is the very first thing you'll hear. Ghost of Perdition is one of the best album openers that I can think of. It wastes no time. You get those couple keyboard notes, and then you just get punched in the face with those absolutely brutal roars from Mikhail. Ghost of Perdition will keep you interested over its entire 10-minute length with some of those rapid transitions of any Opeth song. It's the perfect example of the sing you to sleep and scare you to death formula that the band has. Mikhail really shows off his clean vocal ability here as well, pretty much using his entire range, and it's just got this awesome falsetto section. If I could play someone one song to show them what Opeth sounds like, it would be this one. The Baying of the Hounds is another monster of a track. When those growls come in, my god, that sound shivers down my spine every time. That opening guitar riff with keyboards synced up with it just sounds so good. The perfect soundtrack to the underworld. Beneath the Mire is an underrated gem that showcases one of the things I love most about Ghost Reveries, which I've hinted at a little bit here, and that's the keyboards. Keyboards have been used in other Opeth albums, but there hasn't been an Opeth album where they've been used like this one, and this is the first one where they're incredibly prominent. This album will be nothing without the keyboards, and the intro riff on the keyboard to Beneath the Mire is something I challenge you to get out of your head, because it's pretty much impossible. My favorite song on Ghost Reveries is Harlequin Forest. I don't know how to explain it, but whenever this song comes on, it just brings me to another world. It perfectly depicts the feeling of being lost and not being able to find a way back. The vocals here are just incredible, with many very challenging runs on the clean side, and of course the growls we all love Mikhail so much for. The beginning of this song is heavy, then about halfway it slows right down. The slow section of Harlequin Forest is where it really shines. The harmonics come on and you just get this gorgeous, gorgeous section of just one of the greatest metal songs ever written. I've spent hours just listening to this thing on repeat, and I could spend hours more. I love it that much. One of my favorite songs, not just by Opeth, but by any band, period. Love it, love it, love it. Hours of Weld is the softest track on the album, and it's probably the saddest Opeth song. Lyrically, it discusses someone who is trying to fix their mistakes and make themselves a new life. Something about the quiet piano keys and chords just hits me different. It's a really nice change of pace from the hard side of the album, which it kicks right back into with the Grand Conjuration. With a name like the Grand Conjuration, you know you're in for something heavy. This song is a long build-up that just builds and builds the suspense until Mikhail just goes full demon mode. First time I heard this song, I was not expecting it, and that actually made me jump. Still one of my favorite moments of any Opeth song. The heavy side of the song is what really shines for me. Instrumentally, it features a great guitar solo, and Martin Lopez really does great behind the kit here. The Grand Conjuration is a live staple, and a shortened version of this song actually got some radio play. It's a great song that you should not pass up. Overall, Ghost Reveries is another fantastic album from Opeth. To me, this is the album that they put out that feels the most Opeth. It's really like the combination of everything that the band was at the time. And big changes were to come after Ghost Reveries. Martin Lopez would leave, Peter would leave, but the band still stayed together through that time and made some great albums through the end of the 2000s and then in the 2010s. But for me, I feel like Ghost Reveries was really the last Opeth album that was like truly something special, truly a front-to-back masterpiece, and I think it was a very high note for them to go out on. This is the last album of that 6-album run, like you guys saw, where I placed pretty much every Opeth album from the late 90s up until now, and Ghost Reveries is no different. It's absolutely fantastic. Ghost Reveries for me is the borderline between a really high A tier and an S tier. And I know I already have so many Opeth albums in S tier. Most of these videos, guys, I'm not going to have 4 to 5 albums placed that high. But I feel like Ghost Reveries is deserving of an S tier. I can't really think of anything about this album that I don't like. I personally don't like it as much as those other 4 S tier albums, which are Mimes Rehearse, Still Life, Blackwater Park, and Damnation, but I still love it. It's very solid from front to back, and then songs like Ghost of Perdition, Harlequin Forest push it over the top into that S tier for me. Most bands, this would be the highlight of their career, and it's a testament to how good Opeth is that I would consider this to be their 5th best album. You have to be a really special band to make 5 albums as great as Ghost Reveries or better. Fittingly named, Watershed is an album that brought about great change for the band. Martin Lopez and Peter Lindgren would leave, with Fredrik Åkesson, think that's how you say it, taking over the lead guitar, and Martin Axelrod becoming the new drummer. This is the last Opeth album to feature death metal vocals, and I consider Watershed the transition album between the death metal of the 90s and the 2000s and the progressive rock of the 2010s. It has some songs that sound very much like the prog rock they would later release, as well as some that have that classic Opeth sound. Watershed's a weird album to review, because it has some songs on it that are amazing, but overall, compared to the other stuff Opeth released up to this point, this album's kind of messy. The album opens with Coil, a very short and soft track before smashing into you like a freight train with Heir Apparent. Heir Apparent really is one of the heaviest Opeth songs, not really slowing down for 1 second. It's got that ominous opening before going straight into 8 minutes of brutal death metal. This song also has a really incredible guitar solo, proving that Åkesson was a great addition to the band. Overall, Heir Apparent is an awesome song, and I think it's one of the highlights on Watershed. Next song is The Lotus Eater. This is another great, really heavy track that takes the super rapid transitions to the next level. Mikhail will just switch between singing and growling on a dime. I'd say it's the Ghost of Perdition of this album. What makes the Lotus Eater so special, though, is the drumming. In my opinion, Axe is the best drummer that Opeth has had. His drum beats are incredibly intricate and complex while still fitting the song. He's a star on Watershed, as well as all of the Opeth albums to come after. And the Lotus Eater, in my opinion, is his magnum opus where he really shows off what he can do. By miles and miles and miles, the best song on this album is Burden. This is one of the all-time great Opeth songs in my books. Right up there with a song like Black Rose Immortal, Demon of the Fall, Godhead's Lament, Blackwater Park, or Harlequin Forest. It's a song about overcoming something burdening you, an ocean of sorrow, and every note sung has so much emotion and power in it. It's a song that you don't hear, you feel. The thing that really makes it one of my favorite songs ever, though, is how it tells a story in the instruments. The last half of the song is all instrumental, having one of the greatest guitar solos ever, as well as the guitar slowly going out of tune at the end, signaling the life of the narrator unwinding. Burden is a god-tier track that is a must-listen for any rock fan. Porcelain Heart is another good track on Watershed, but honestly, after Burden, the rest of this album just doesn't really stick with me all that much. Watershed's good, but I'd be lying if I said that this is an album that I listened to in full much at all. In fact, going back to make this video was the first time I'd given Watershed some listens in a few years. And honestly, I pretty much thought the same of it what I thought a few years ago. Heir Apparent's really good. The Lotus Eater's really good. Burden is incredible. But the rest of the album, to me, it feels messy. And do you know what? I totally get that, considering that half the band pretty much had been replaced here. New lead guitarist, new drummer. So they were really, finding the place of those members in the band. And they wanted to change their sound, as they would in the 2010s. So they were experimenting with different stuff. And the product of that wasn't half bad. It's a good album, but Opeth are more than good. They're amazing. And Watershed just kind of gets lost in the sea of amazing Opeth records, if you get what I mean. I think Watershed's a solid B tier. I definitely can't put this album in C tier because Heir Apparent and the Lotus Eater are good, and I mean, one of my favorite songs of all time is on this album. So there's certainly stuff here that is incredible, but overall, it just falls short of the other stuff Opeth have done. This is a good album, don't get me wrong. I just think overall, compared to other Opeth albums, this one's definitely bottom half, and it's not nearly as good as the stuff they did in the early 2000s. It's like, this is no Blackwater Park, but there are songs on here that I think you absolutely have to listen to. So, yeah, overall, Watershed, I like it, but it's just not an album that I'm gonna listen to all the time. I hope you guys enjoyed watching this video. If you'd like to see more, feel free to subscribe. Next part that'll be up, I'll be covering the 4 2010s Opeth albums. So, almost done this series. This has been a long series of videos, like just those first 2 parts at 71 minutes total. So, if you watch the whole thing, fantastic. And yeah, if you want to see more, I'll have part 3 up sometime soon. I don't have a regular schedule or anything. It'll be done when it's done.